Welcome to Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast with Eric, Wolf, and Ashi Vale, where we help you become a better industry professional by gaining inspiration from some of the world's most successful people in the food and beverage tourism industry. With each episode, we meet these leaders and examine their secrets of success. We reveal the obstacles and challenges they have faced, along with their solutions and triumphs, and give you ideas and inspirations for many of the same business issues that you may be facing as well. And now for today's episode. I'm Eric Wolf, and I'll be your host today for episode 30 of Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast. And joining me today is co-host Ashi Vale. Today we'll be speaking with Richard Bagnold. A Londoner by birth, food has been an integral part of Richard's life since his early days, positively influenced by the Scandinavian dishes prepared by his Norwegian mother. Throughout his life, he has worked in various capacities in food service, including as kitchen porter and barman. His passion for quality food continued to grow, and in 2017, he founded his Major Foodie website, a play on words representing both his love of food as well as his military training. Today, he's one of the few people who have eaten in every Michelin star restaurant in the UK. He travels the world looking for his next great meal, and he documents his discoveries to his nearly 21,000 followers on Twitter and 15,000 on Instagram. If you're looking for London's best kept food secrets, Richard's your man.
Welcome, Richard. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast. So tell us a story for how you got into this world of food, which sounds quite fascinating.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's like most things, they don't happen immediately or overnight. Mine was quite an organic switch. I've always obviously adored good food. I suddenly got the bug, when you discover something that you're really, really fond of. The obvious question in your mind is, why aren't I doing more of this? And mine happened when I was in a little place called San Sebastian in Spain, which is near the Basque region, and they have this delightful mix of old town pincho shops, which is just smaller versions of tapas, just wall to wall stores of those, many of them run by families who've done nothing but one thing for decades. And it also has, I think it's still got the most amount of Michelin stars in this one town per capita than anywhere else in the world. And I was celebrating a 30th birthday with a couple of friends. One of my friends was turning 30, and we went to a 3 Michelin star restaurant. And it was there when I had this absolutely gorgeous piece of foie gras, sautéed foie gras with a layer of fig on top. I mean, it was just that simple. And the fig had been broiled, so it had caramelized, and all this syrup was dripping onto this sautéed foie gras. And I remember vividly just the stop moment that happened. And it wasn't even my dish, it was Stefan's. So I tried to end up stealing as much of it as possible. But we knew from that moment that this was a truly wonderful experience. And so when I got back to London, I just thought, let's do more of this. And I gradually went around as many places as I could in my spare time that were reportedly wonderful. And I documented them all along the way, took photos, took notes, had chats with the chefs. And before I knew it, I was pretty much sort of had this catalogue of different places. And I thought, well, I should do something with this. And some friends said the same thing, you should share this and allow people to see what might be best for when, etc. And that's when I created the website Major Foodie and put it all up. And it just seemed to, as most things grow, it like a tree, it grows arms and legs, and more people become interested, and it kept on fueling what I already enjoyed doing.
What was the name of the restaurant you ate at where you had this wonderful experience that changed your career path?
In San Sebastian?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called Arzak. It's been there for many, many years, well over 2 decades from memory. Joanne-Marie Arzak is the head chef, who's now been taken over by his daughter. It's one of three Michelin star restaurants in San Sebastian alone. Yeah, it was just one of those wonderful experiences. You don't forget those moments when you were spilled over the edge in going from, I like this, to why haven't we been doing this all the time? And I want to do more of it.
Richard, you've garnered a large number of followers in a short period of time. What's your secret?
Well, I don't know, really. I mean, I just try and be as straight down the line and honest as possible. I'm not looking for stardom or status with these. I just want to make sure that try to put the definitive viewpoint down as possible, as far as I can see it. I mean, everyone has a different viewpoint, but no, I don't know. I'm very flattered that there are so many people that wish to read my reviews and follow it. I'm much more happy uncovering layers and just looking at what the actual score is beneath, because there is a lot of white noise and clutter out there. Difficult to know who to trust sometimes. So I haven't actually been told point blank whether this is the reason why people enjoy it, but I'm very glad they do, and they know it's just me doing this. There's no one else writing these viewpoints on my website, so it is just a single lens with a set criteria for all of them, and that will continue.
Richard, when you go to these restaurants, are you an anonymous diner, or do they know that you're showing up?
I always wish to go anonymously, so I don't splash the cards or anything like that at the beginning. I actually quite enjoy. It's essential that I see it as much as possible. So if something does happen where you might not wish it to go, or a service wasn't particularly good, I'll keep quiet and then speak to them at the end and just give a bit of feedback. It does vary sometimes. Before I even got to the door of Persist in New York, which is a 3 Michelin star restaurant, about 10 meters away, the door opened and someone was at the door saying, "Good evening, Mr. Bagnold." And I said, "What?" And I hope that's what they would do with everyone. But on asking, I said, "Wow, how did you know
Yeah.
it was me?" And they revealed that they had done a bit of research and background checks, and so they had already looked in, and obviously the site's open source, or as all the social media handles. And another restaurant just outside of Egham, outside of London, I could see a chap in a suit peer around the corner as I was having lunch, and it turned out to be the general manager who was speaking with his staff just to check, who came into the conservatory where I was having coffee afterwards and said, "Oh, I didn't realise it was you." Like, what? You know, it's very, very flattering. So I get that from time to time, and then absolutely nothing for the vast majority of the cases. But no, I don't reveal it until the end. It's becoming a bit more difficult to hide because I have to do many of these places on my own, and I prefer to use a proper camera. And so if a restaurant sees someone on their own asking all sorts of questions about what supplier do they use for a certain fish, what is the weight of a certain fish, what coffee do they use, where's the bread made, etc., just to get a feel of the restaurant and its produce, how many years, where's the chef been, etc. They begin to, in general, start to get a little bit not twitchy but suspicious that this might not have been this person's first time in a restaurant. So it's getting a little bit more difficult to hide, but always I'll try and make sure that is definitely the case at the beginning.
Richard, eating at restaurants, specifically 3-star Michelin restaurants, can be quite expensive. How do you fund yourself, and how does the business work?
Well, it can be expensive, but you can do it in a more reasonable way. So the first thing is I pay for all my meals, and that comes out of my own pocket from a normal daytime job, which I've had for many years, but since left. So up until now, it's been my former life working for the government, and so it's my normal wages that look after that. Yes, it can be expensive, but it is possible to have a meal without drink. I only discovered this a while back. I mean, it sounds bizarre, but restaurants would usually make a markup of about 1 to 3 on any wine, and usually 1 to 4 on food. But a plate of salmon isn't likely to cost £1,000, whereas a bottle of wine can. So if you tone it down on the alcohol, I mean, that is a surefire way to reduce the costs. You can also eat at many restaurants, including many Michelin-starred restaurants. In fact, I would say the majority of Michelin-star restaurants, compared to normal chain restaurants, do some very good set menus at lunch, and that's also a very good way to save on the costs. If you want to just have a reconnaissance of a place, of a venue, you can use it as a test drive, as it were, see if you like the place and always come back. Many of these places I have to drive to, so regrettably I have to just have tap water sometimes for these meals. But then again, wherever I can, it's a pleasure to try the wine list, see how the pairings are, or just have the wines that you really like the look of, and enjoy the whole hog. So it is possible to reduce those costs, and you can actually get access more quickly when you're on your own. And that's happened in the past, whereas if you're in a group of 3 or 4, it can be very difficult. So you can get quick access to places where there are sometimes very good offers as a bonus.
Do you plan to monetize your website in any way? Do you plan to advertise? What are your thoughts on funding for the future?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't answer the second part of your question today. So Major Foodie is completely independent. That I fund. The monetizing of that is now through my self-employed model of my concierge service in London called Richard Bagnold Concierge Services, or richardbagnold.com. That's from a study that I did for an MBA to work out what would be the best way to monetize Major. If there was an answer, I was fully braced for there not to be an answer. But it turns out that there are quite a few people out there that do want to know where the very best restaurants are, particularly in London, and what the gems are of that city and how to go about it and maximize their time. Yeah, I also discovered when traveling to different cities where I used to go for the holiday first and see if there was a good restaurant. Now that seems to have morphed into I'll specifically fly to places where there are restaurants and venues that I would love to try. Michelin starred or not, that does not matter. Wherever the gems are. And each time I do that in different cities, I found myself asking the same thing. If only there was a guide here that could take me to the best places, without doubt the best places, and get me in there quickly or easily, and show me the really prized gems of a city with access to places that not many other people may be able to get, and prepare the whole thing for me. So my time is maximized, and because you're against the clock when you're on a holiday, and everything's quite expensive. But if you plan it carefully, it's okay. But very often you can't. So I found myself asking, if only I had a really good guide, someone who's excellent to be with, good to speak with, knows everything like the back of his hand. That would be exactly what I need. And it's happened so many times that I thought, well, I do know London like the back of my hand. Why don't I do this for other people? I'd love to share what I've discovered and help people that want to know where the best places are. That's what I'm doing now, and that is the bespoke concierge services that I provide on richardbagnold.com.
Now, Richard, when you travel, how do you find or meet other kindred spirits who are on the same level, the same mindset as you, that you know are going to take you to a great place that you're going to love, not just someone who professes to know good food and takes you to their favorite places?
Yeah, it's all a question of who to trust, really. I've got a few very lucky contacts who I know if they say, I'd like to introduce you to this person and they'll look after you, I know I'm going to be in very good hands. And that just takes a lot of time. I don't think there's any magic secret formula to that. So I had a wonderful tour of the Tsukiji market in Tokyo. And that was brilliant. I managed to get around the whole markets and look at these, I mean, gargantuanly huge oysters. I mean, massive compared to those that we have in Europe. Fruit that was off the scale. Melons. It's interesting when you speak to a farmer who has taken the majority of his melons off a sprawling vine to make way for the best melon that he or she thinks they have, and checking it by whacking a rubber hammer on all of them just to check the sound of the melon. As was explained to me, and the removal of all the other ones puts all the nutrients into one melon, so they can create this super melon, which in some cases can sell for about $200 or equivalent in Japan. I mean that's just wonderful, and this tour guide was wonderful at showing where all these gems are. I've slightly rambled on, Eric, and lost the original part of the question, which I think was how you how you go about getting these people, or was it
Well, just
more?
how you find these people. I mean, you were saying how you have a certain number of people you trust, and I think that it probably goes back to that. I remember growing up as a teenager, there was a family that lived across the street, and they would always say to my parents that they tried this new restaurant, it was fantastic, we'd have to go. And we realized over time that every restaurant they liked, we hated. So we
Right.
knew when they said, "Oh, you've got to check out this new Italian place, this new steak place, whatever," we would just nod politely and not go because we knew that that we could not
Yeah.
trust their opinion of something. And it goes back to, we have this matchmaking methodology that we do in our market research, and basically there's 13 different kinds of food lover profiles. And so I think what you're doing is just identifying people with a similar profile, which means that you have similar values, and that means that there's a very little chance of being disappointed then.
Correct. I mentioned white noise, but there are lots of referrals out there. It's very difficult to know if you've just met someone and they say, "Oh, you've got to try this place." I obviously will politely say, "Yep, okay, thanks," and have a look at it. But it's very difficult to know. I think you do have to get to know the person that's referring. You can make a judgment call on which are most likely to be trustworthy. There are lots of different criteria that people will put into that verdict of, "Oh, you must try this place." It can be overlapped by someone's memory of or emotional connection with the setting. Someone might have had a birthday or a wonderful experience in general in terms of the group.
Or how much alcohol they've consumed.
How lubricated everyone was. But basically, it's I will always go for the food first, and wherever I can see that someone needs a certain environment or an atmosphere or a particular price tag, I do try and matchmake as best as possible. But I suppose you just have to be a bit more inquisitive. I find myself certainly irritating my friends by being a bit more detailed than others by asking out what exactly is the price, what their which cuisine, etc. But
Richard,
uh,
it's an affliction I share, and people love us for it. They understand that we're particular. It's
yes,
just
particular, very good word.
there you go.
Code for intensely annoying. I'm sure to most of them, but
Probably. Coming up on April 22 and 23 of this year is our Food Trucks Online Food Travel Summit. Now in its 5th year, Food Trucks Online is our industry's only fully online and global culinary travel trade event. The summit covers trends and issues of interest to owners and managers of all size businesses and destination marketers of all kinds. Get the information you need to take your career or business to the next level. Registration opens February 24 at worldfoodtravel.org. Now, I
but
got to ask you,
yeah, sorry, go for it.
so following on that idea, what if you go to a place that ends up being, and this is either with a guide or a friend or on your own, that's an absolute disaster. I'm sure it's happened. I dated a restaurant critic in New York City, and I learned that if you go to a place that was a disaster, you just don't review them. You just don't say anything. Do you follow that same process, or what have you done when you've had a disaster?
I certainly won't discount it from being reviews if it's very very rare. I mean, if it's a place that is a chain, for example, and it's bad, no, I mean I probably wouldn't bother about that. If it's a venue that is reportedly very good and it turns out to be a shocker, yeah, of course I've got no problems just writing it exactly as I found it. But it also, in terms of giving the feedback, it depends on how well that particular place can accept feedback. I find regularly that the question of how was your meal or how was that, it isn't really a question of concern. It's mainly a cue to say this is the bit where you can say wonderful things. However, there was one recent Michelin starred lunch I had, and the question at the end was asked as I was walking out from a staff that had been ignoring me and several others all afternoon, spent most of the time chatting at the front of the house and welcoming guests with open arms that they knew, and it was almost in a bit of a clique way, and some of the dishes weren't very good, and it was almost as if every member of staff just wanted to get away from the table as quickly as possible. I had to double take it once. I didn't think I'd done anything wrong, but apart from going there, and they asked at the end how I found it, and I told them exactly as I found it, which was just utterly poor in every way. And it could be better here, and it would be better if staff took more time at the table, just as opposed to throwing things down and sprinting off. It might be helpful smile at some stage, and all these things. And they were a little bit shocked at the end. So, and I find it's probably better to do that than just be a keyboard warrior. I mean, if they ask, of course, if they've done something that's I really do think could be better. Frankly, it could be a bit of a blessing for them if they get this feedback, because particularly in Britain, as I'm sure you've both encountered, we can be all too polite when it's actually over the top. It could be a lot better if there was a bit more honesty, i.e., this wasn't very good. I wasn't very pleased with this. It's a very long-winded way of answering the question, but yes, I will definitely give feedback where it's due, and I hope it's fair.
Yeah, no, feedback's definitely a gift. I suppose consistency is really important when reviewing these restaurants. Are there times when it's just,
Yeah.
they've had a bad day and they ask you to return to
Of
review
course.
it another time?
Oh, of course, yeah, and I think everyone has to be a little bit careful about being 100% certain on everything at all times. I mean, I'm no stranger to making mistakes or sometimes getting things wrong, of course. And to say this place is absolutely hopeless is wrong. I mean, I think it's fair to say that on this occasion, this experience was X, Y, Z, and I hope I review in that manner, because it can change. I mean, seasons change. The head chef might not be there. You have different ingredients to play at different times. There may have just been a dip in the staff that day. Of course, everyone has bad moments. I think it's important to try and go back to somewhere as often as possible to get that consistency. But it is just a little old me on my own going around. It would be a bit of a tall order to go around all of them every year, just to keep it up. There are some places where you instinctively know what the quality of somewhere is like. So I'm very happy to go back to places, and I have gone back to certain places again. So as far as possible, yes.
It sounds like you've been to, you say, about 80 of the Michelin-starred restaurants in the UK. You did that all in a year. Is that right?
Oh, I see. Well, when I decided to do all of them, yeah, I had a fairly tall order to finish off. And having done the 3s and the 2s in the country, that just left the remaining ones, which I think were about 80 at the time. And that was quite a trek, because you have to get time on the weekends, wherever I was, in the evenings. It does take time and a fair wedge of money to travel and get hotels and gradually just go through them. So yeah, the last home straight was probably the most challenging, particularly as some of these places are, if you had a map of the UK and wanted to do all of them, many of them are not open just when you need them to be open. Several of them will have, obviously, and they need it, have breaks and holidays, and many of them are not open on Mondays and Tuesdays. That's pretty much their weekends. And some might be closed for refurbishment just when you could really do with going in if you've travelled all the way across the country. So it was a fair amount of planning and travelling and sleeping in bizarre places to do it. So it was it's certainly not overnight. When I decided, okay, let's just do this, it became a very enjoyable mission, and actually a very good way to travel around the country. I discovered places that I never knew were there.
Do you have plans like this for the future, perhaps in a different country?
Oh, definitely. No, so wherever I go now, I've been to, I think, all of the continents, stroke countries that have the Michelin guide. I mean, it is not the only guide, but it is as good as anywhere to start. I certainly don't agree with all of it, but I very much enjoy walking around the streets of Singapore and their hawker dining, their Michelin stars, as it happens, venues, just as they are in Bangkok. I get as much pleasure doing that as sticking a blazer and a presentable pair of shoes on and going into a 3 Michelin starred restaurant in a 5-star hotel. I mean, they're both wonderful, or they can be both wonderful, but I love exploring as far as possible. So where have I done now? Macau, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, places in America. Places where the Michelin guide doesn't go, but they have different guides. In Australia, for example, they have a hat system. I would like to explore a little bit more of America. I mean, I've been around a lot of Europe because that's where I spend most of my time. But where's next? I think, well, I'm going back to Japan for the Olympics, and it'll be an absolute joy to get back to certain places and try new ones, especially in Kyoto and Tokyo. But I wouldn't mind seeing a bit more of the US. Just a question of time and resources.
Richard, you were talking a little bit about the Michelin guides, and when I had dinner with you in London, you were talking a little bit about your opinion about reviews and review sites and so on. What do you think is not working in the current system of restaurant or experience reviews?
It's a very good question. We go back to that question of who to trust being quite difficult to find. There are many influencers out there, and I suppose I could be guilty of saying I'm practically one of them now with social media accounts. It's not that I'm trying to achieve. I'm not trying to promote anyone just because they're providing some sort of arrangement or paying me. I mean, that's not what I'd like to do. There are multiple sources out there that will say this is the next best place, and it's almost painfully clear that there's been some sort of arrangement in place for that. It's tricky to sort the wheat from the chaff, but I suppose one of the only ways of doing it is actually just getting out there and seeing for yourself. Certainly, that's the way I prefer the most, to hands, eyes, and mouth on is probably the only way to make that call. You can read all the reviews and all the see all the accolades as much as you wish, but it's only really when you, which is a start point, but it's only when you go there, I think you can truly decide.
You know, in our latest research that just came out, and this is our 2020 Food Travel Monitor, we learned that the impact of social media is actually waning to some extent, and specifically in the UK, that brought down the statistics for the entire set of countries that we surveyed. And you know, you'll remember the Facebook scandal from a couple years ago with the privacy issues, but we found happening instead is that people are going back to friends and family and trusting them more and seeking out their opinions more.
Yeah, I would say one of the most ardent users of the press Richards help button is my mother. Whenever she's taken my godmother out, and I'm very happy to recommend someone I know will be appropriate for them, and these very nice tucked away places that also serve really good food.
So you're kind of an Alexa for restaurant recommendations?
Well, that's very kind. If that were true, that would be. I'm very happy to recommend it, just exactly according to what someone's after. It's enjoyable for me to know that I'm potentially going to get someone to where they may wish the most if it suits an occasion. It's rather like helping these people that come to London and discerning clients that want the very best and a really good day out. I enjoy getting that ready for them because I know it's going to be exactly what they wish. In the examples case, if mum comes back and says, yeah, we really enjoyed that one, bitch, that was so good. I mean, if that happens, I get that, that good feeling that you can skip away. You've done a good job of matchmaking someone to what they want.
Richard, I'm sure after hearing the podcast, there are lots of people who'd be inspired by what you do and in general want to get into the food tourism business or the food service business. What advice do you have for young professionals looking to get into that? And also, what were some of the challenges that, looking back, you now wish you had other ways to avoid?
Oh, it's very great. That's a great question. Advice wise, I'm afraid there is no other way than to actually do it oneself, which means getting out there and seeing the landscape, because it is the only way to have a bird's eye view. It's very difficult. There are lots of lists out there. I often end up thinking to myself that's great, but I mean, have all these people been to all of those restaurants to make that decision, or is it just based on something they may have done a few years ago and that's it, or is it a selection of three? Put simply, the more places that you go to and the more that you see out on the ground, the more you have in your arsenal. There's nothing truly clever about that. It's just having the time and the experience to do it. In terms of the challenges, I mean, I really was a case of time being the biggest constraint for me. So the earlier that you can start doing anything that you're interested in, I think the better, because that's only going to give you a lot more mileage. I don't think any of these things happen quickly. So whatever field it is, I think there's great merit in, even if it's just taking an interest. And in my case, just it began pretty much as a hobby, something that I just enjoyed doing, and it gradually morphed into something a lot greater, something I truly love doing. I still get that buzz every time I go into a new place with new menus and new staff and new ideas, and that fuels me. It keeps me going. I really enjoy still, and long may that continue. But you can't speed that up. It's only time. So yeah, I was try and put as much of that aside as possible, as is humanly possible, and any other elements that will help enable that. Bit tricky to say what they are at all times. Yeah, that's the top one I can say from my point of view.
So to get ahead in your career, you've got to do the time.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. It doesn't seem to be much. Well, particularly if you walk into something organically, you realise just how long it's taken. If you have an idea and go for it, I think anyone will soon find that it's almost like pushing a boulder uphill. Getting contacts takes time. Finding gatekeepers takes time. Establishing relationships takes time. And just when you think you've got plan set or everything's set and you're pushing this boulder uphill, someone comes along with another brilliant idea and puts a bit of weight on it, and it pushes you back a bit. So I suppose a persistence is always going to help as well. Just whatever happens, and I'm sure this is not anything new. I don't think that anyone else has said already, but it is just going firm on your beliefs and your wishes, and just not letting that get deterred, and just to keep going for it.
Do you have a quote you're known for?
Oh, the quotes. Yeah, well, it'd probably be friends saying, or overhearing me say countless times, excuse me, but do you have any of that? I don't suppose you have any more of that sauce remaining, do you? I'm everywhere I go, I'm afraid I'm a bit of a sauce fiend. Yeah.
I understand
remoulades,
100%.
emulsions. Yes.
I understand,
you have
Richard.
this infliction as well, Eric.
I do. Yes, we require more sauce constantly.
I think the last one that I had was it was actually at 11 Medicine Park in New York, which it happens to be a 3-star restaurant by a Swiss chef called Daniel Hume, and he has this sensational duck which it's sort of lacquered with honey and lavender and cumin spices, and has a really lovely crispy coating to the skin, perfectly rendered. The duck is wonderful, and I think the sauce that he had there was blueberry and citrus jus, a reduction of the duck. They usually come in these little sort of containers and carafes, and I found myself just drinking straight from it at the end. I could only toast their good health with that. I mean, it was just that wonderful. But yes, sauce béarnaise, hollandaise, emulsions are usually extremely well received. So
did you have
yes, I think my friends.
Picture of yourself, Richard, drinking the sauce? That
I did
fantastic.
actually. I think.
Excellent.
Oh right, yes. Yeah, no, it's bizarre that you mentioned that, Eric, but yes, I did. Yeah, I was.
So, Richard, as we wrap up our podcast, I'd love to ask, what inspirational quote from someone else do you love?
Yeah, well, I'll go back to Churchill, and I do quite like his quote of "Eating my own words has never given me indigestion." Not least because of its food connotation, but I think it's very true that I used to be supremely taken by mistakes, and when you get things wrong, and it's all over when that happens. I mean, things do happen, and I get things wrong, but I think it's I like that quote because it reminds me that mistakes can be overcome, and if you focus on what to do next and how to get better, then that's far more important. And that there's a massive amount of inspirational quotes about that out there, but I like that one. And as always, Churchill sums it up extremely well.
Words to live by. Well, Richard, thank you for taking the time today to entertain us with your thoughts about fine dining and restaurant reviews and world travels. You are definitely an interesting guy, and I look forward to our next get-together in London.
Well, thank you very much for having me, both you and Ashley, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Richard. It was our pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks for listening today. The Eat Well, Travel Better podcast is brought to you by the World Food Travel Association, the world's leading authority on food and beverage tourism. Our mission is to preserve and promote culinary cultures through hospitality and travel. By doing so, we empower local communities and entrepreneurs with the knowledge and tools needed to reach new food lovers and gain a competitive edge. Founded in 2003, now each year we shepherd a community of 200,000 professionals in more than 100 countries. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And you can learn more about us, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our family at worldfoodtravel.org. Until next time, eat well and travel better.